The
told you to
storm that
move.
Commander
Get up.
Hudson had warned about was no
Leave me
longer
alone.
a distant
Help.
threat. It had arrived in
What are you
full
doing?
force
Stop
in the
pushing
form
him.
of federal investigators, armed with the authority of military justice and a determination to hold accountable those who had disrespected a Medal of Honor recipient. Officer Daniel Hayes's law enforcement career was over, but the legal consequences were just beginning. The same arrogance and prejudice that had driven him to mistreat Nathaniel Rhodes would now be his undoing as federal investigators meticulously documented his misconduct. Before we dive further, if you value stories of justice, resilience, and the real-life consequences of abuse of authority, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every story we share here is about revealing the truth, giving a voice to the unheard, and making sure lessons are learned. Join our community and stay connected. You don't want to miss what comes next. At 8:45 p.m., the quiet streets of Brookfield, Ohio, were disrupted by a convoy unlike any the small city had ever seen. 3 black armored vehicles, flanked by military police motorcycles, rolled into the Brookfield Police Department parking lot with a precision that spoke of military-level coordination. The lead vehicle bore Pentagon license plates, and the flags mounted on its bumpers indicated the presence of general officers inside. Major General Thomas Whitaker stepped out first, his posture the embodiment of authority earned over decades of service in combat zones across the world. At 56 years old, his silver-streaked hair and lined face reflected years dedicated to military service and the protection of American soldiers. Behind him followed General Caroline Vega, whose presence signaled that the incident had drawn attention at the very top of Pentagon leadership. The arrival of 2 generals at a small-town police station was unprecedented. Every officer inside understood that history was unfolding in front of them. This wasn't routine federal oversight. This was the full weight of the U.S. military being brought down upon those who had mistreated one of the nation's most decorated veterans. Chief Robert Simmons met the generals at the entrance, his hands shaking despite his attempts to appear composed. "Generals, I want to assure you that we are cooperating fully with the investigation, and we deeply regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred." Whitaker's response was immediate and cutting. "Misunderstanding? Chief Simmons, one of America's most decorated war heroes, was assaulted, humiliated, and denied proper medical care by your officers. This isn't a misunderstanding. It is a complete failure of leadership, training, and basic decency." General Vega stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "Chief Simmons, we are here because Nathaniel Rhodes isn't just any veteran. He is a Medal of Honor recipient. The men and women who serve under my command see heroes like him as the embodiment of everything noble about military service. When you abuse him, you attack the very foundation of military honor." Behind the protective glass of the booking area, Officer Daniel Hayes watched. The confident swagger he had earlier displayed was replaced by the pale, trembling fear of a man who was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistakes. "I want to see Nathaniel Rhodes immediately," Whitaker demanded. "I want to assess his medical condition and ensure he receives the care he needs." Colonel Ava Santos, who had been coordinating the federal investigation, led the generals to the area where Rhodes was receiving medical attention. Paramedics were tending to him after hours of deliberate neglect, during which he had suffered dehydration and severe PTSD episodes. Seeing Rhodes, upright in a wheelchair but clearly in distress, triggered a wave of anger in both generals. "Nate," Whitaker said, using Rhodes's nickname from his military service, "I am so sorry this happened to you. This is not how America treats its heroes." Rhodes looked up at his former commander, relief mixing with exhaustion in his eyes. "General Whitaker, thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've been trying to explain who I am and what my medical needs are, but these officers refuse to listen." "Sir, your identity has never been in question for those of us who know your record," Vega said firmly.
What happened to you today is a disgrace to everything this nation claims to represent." As paramedics continued treatment, Whitaker turned his attention to the officers responsible for Rhodes' suffering. His first target was Daniel Hayes, who was called forward with hesitant, almost trembling steps. The officer who had earlier dismissed Rhodes's identity now stood face to face with two of the most powerful military leaders in the country. "Officer Hayes," Whitaker said, calm but deadly, "I understand you were the one who arrested Colonel Rhodes?" "Yes, sir," Hayes replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know who Nathaniel Rhodes is?" Whitaker asked, though the question required no answer. Hayes's mouth opened and closed several times before he stammered, "Sir, I believed he was—" "What did you believe?" Vega interrupted sharply. "A criminal, or someone pretending to be a veteran. I thought the medals and documents were fake!" Hayes blurted out, desperation in his tone. Whitaker produced a tablet and began reciting Rhodes' service record, voice reverent. "Nathaniel Rhodes, United States Army, 30 years of service, 3 combat deployments, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and Congressional Medal of Honor recipient." He paused, letting the gravity of his words hang in the air.
Sink in. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration in the United States. It is awarded for conspicuous gallantry at the risk of life, above and beyond the call of duty. Hayes's face went pale. "Would you like to know how Rhodes earned it?" Vega asked, her voice sharp. Without waiting for an answer, she read from the official citation. On July 22, 2017, Colonel Rhodes's unit came under intense enemy fire in Helmand Province. An IED explosion killed 3 soldiers and wounded 8 others. Rhodes repeatedly exposed himself to hostile fire to rescue wounded men, coordinated their evacuation despite severe injuries that would eventually cost him both legs, and provided covering fire to ensure his unit's survival. His actions saved over 150 American soldiers and altered the outcome of the mission. Hayes trembled as the magnitude of his error became undeniable. He had assaulted a living legend, a man whose heroism was recognized at the highest military levels. "And that's not all," Whitaker continued. "You didn't just assault a veteran, you humiliated him, denied him medication, and mocked his service. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Hayes could only nod. His career, reputation, and freedom were unraveling before him. Every officer involved in the mocking began to realize the consequences they too would face. Detective Leila Ramirez, who had tried to intervene earlier, approached with documentation detailing Rhodes's mistreatment. "Generals, I've recorded every part of his arrest and treatment. I tried to raise concerns but was overruled by supervisors," she said. Whitaker accepted the files, acknowledging her efforts. "Detective Ramirez, your integrity will be noted in our report. At least one officer here understands the meaning of honor." As the evening unfolded, it became clear that Hayes's arrest report was filled with fabrications. Multiple officers had mocked Rhodes, and the leadership had failed in oversight. The systematic misconduct transformed this from an individual failure to an institutional problem. Chief Simmons, facing the generals, attempted to maintain composure. "Generals, we will take corrective action." Whitaker's incredulous glare silenced him. "Chief, you allowed a Medal of Honor recipient to be treated like a common criminal. Accountability, not lip service, is the only corrective action that matters." As the generals prepared to escort Rhodes to proper medical care, they delivered a final warning to the department. "This case will serve as an example nationwide. When veterans are dishonored, federal consequences will follow. The era of impunity is over." Officer Hayes, once confident and self-assured, now stood broken and trembling. The full fury of justice had arrived, and there would be no escape. The morning after the general's visit, the atmosphere inside the Brookfield Police Department had transformed into a tense mix of fear, shame, and quiet resentment. Officers whispered in corners, glancing nervously at Hayes, who now moved like a man carrying the weight of a lifetime of mistakes in the span of hours. The walls that once echoed with casual arrogance now resonated with accountability, and the air was thick with the unspoken truth. The entire department had been exposed. Nathaniel Rhodes, though physically exhausted, had been transferred to a private care facility arranged by the Pentagon. His injuries, both physical and psychological, were being treated with the urgency and respect they deserved. But even in the quiet of the hospital room, Rhodes's mind replayed the moments leading up to his arrest, the mockery, the dismissive glances, the ignorance of his identity, and the cruel efficiency with which his rights had been violated. Back in Brookfield, Hayes was called into an emergency meeting with the department's Internal Affairs Unit. Captain Serena Matthews, a woman known for her unyielding standards and sharp analytical mind, led the session. Her reputation was built on rooting out misconduct without fear or favoritism. "Officer Hayes," Matthews began, her voice steady but unforgiving. "We have evidence, eyewitness accounts, and video recordings of your actions. You are facing serious charges, both criminal and civil. This is not just about discipline. It's about justice for Colonel Rhodes and the integrity of this department." Hayes swallowed hard. "I didn't mean any real harm, Captain. I thought I was doing my job." Matthews' eyes narrowed. "You thought you were doing your job? You assaulted a Medal of Honor recipient, denied medical care, and falsified reports. Tell me again how that constitutes doing your job." Hayes remained silent, the words lodged in his throat. He could feel the walls closing in, the gravity of every action he had taken finally catching up to him. Meanwhile, detectives assigned to the case had begun reviewing footage from every angle. Security cameras inside the station captured moments of mockery and physical intimidation that went far beyond Hayes. Several other officers were caught laughing at Rhodes's injuries, mocking his wheelchair, and ignoring his pleas for medical attention. The department's Internal Review Board was already preparing to issue subpoenas for criminal charges. Lieutenant Marcus Green, one of the few officers who had tried to intervene on Rhodes's behalf, was interviewed in detail. "I told my superiors multiple times that this was wrong," Green explained. "I even offered to call higher authorities directly, but I was told to follow orders and let it play out. I can't help but feel responsible, too, for not doing more." The investigation revealed a chilling pattern. Hayes was not a rogue actor, but a product of a culture within the department that tolerated prejudice, intimidation, and the dismissal of complaints from vulnerable populations. Officers had been trained to enforce authority at all costs, but no one had been trained to respect the dignity of those they served. The irony was sharp. Here was a department sworn to protect citizens, yet they had violated the rights of one of the most celebrated heroes of the United States military. As the department prepared for federal review, Hayes was escorted to the city courthouse. He faced multiple counts of assault, civil rights violations, and misconduct in office. The courtroom was crowded, journalists and local citizens drawn by the unprecedented nature of the case. People had followed Rhodes's ordeal since reports of his mistreatment began leaking through social media and local news outlets. The spectacle of a small-town police department held accountable for its actions was unprecedented in Brookfield. Outside the courthouse, community members gathered.
Protesters held signs demanding justice for Rhodes, while others, more curious than outraged, waited to witness history. Rhodes's story had ignited a conversation about accountability in law enforcement nationwide. The viral nature of the case ensured that news agencies across the country were covering every development, putting additional pressure on Brookfield officials. Inside the courtroom, Hayes sat nervously, flanked by legal counsel. His confident posture had vanished, replaced by a hunched, almost defeated demeanor. Each step of the legal process chipped away at the facade he had once presented. The prosecutor, an experienced civil rights attorney named Helen Fitzgerald, began with a meticulous presentation of evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Fitzgerald began, "today you will hear how a decorated veteran, Colonel Nathaniel Rhodes, was subjected to humiliation, denial of medical care, and deliberate assault by those entrusted with protecting him. This is not just a story about one man. It is a story about what happens when authority is abused and accountability is ignored." She played video footage from the department's security cameras, showing Rhodes's attempts to explain his medical needs and officers laughing at his injuries. The courtroom fell silent as the video played. Even the most skeptical observers could not deny the cruelty captured on tape. Witnesses were called: Rhodes's fellow veterans, healthcare providers, and civilians who had observed the aftermath of his arrest. Each testimony reinforced the pattern of abuse, highlighting Hayes's role as the primary aggressor. The prosecutor carefully connected each piece of evidence, constructing a narrative that left little room for doubt. Hayes's defense team attempted to argue that he had acted under standard protocol and that any mistreatment was unintentional. But the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple officers corroborated Rhodes's account, and the internal review revealed clear directives that Hayes had ignored. Even officers who had followed his lead admitted that his behavior was abnormal and inexcusable. As the trial continued, the public debate intensified. Local radio shows invited experts to discuss the implications of the case, while social media platforms erupted with discussions on veterans' rights, law enforcement accountability, and the ethical responsibilities of those in power. Rhodes had unintentionally sparked a national conversation that questioned the very foundation of trust between citizens and those sworn to protect them. Back in the hospital, Rhodes' recovery progressed. Despite the physical and emotional trauma, he remained composed and dignified. He met privately with Whitaker and Vega, who assured him that federal oversight would ensure his protection and prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. "You have ignited change," Whitaker told him. "Your courage in speaking out, in allowing the truth to be documented, ensures that no other veteran should endure what you experienced. This department will never be the same, and your story will serve as a lesson nationwide." Rhodes nodded, a quiet determination settling over him. "I didn't want this attention. I just wanted to be treated with dignity. But if my suffering can prevent others from going through the same thing, then it's worth it." In Brookfield, the department began an internal purge. Officers implicated in the misconduct were suspended, and leadership faced intense scrutiny. Hayes, once untouchable in his confidence, now confronted a future filled with legal battles, social ostracization, and the weight of irreversible mistakes. The small town had learned, in the harshest possible way, that authority without accountability is a dangerous combination. As the case moved toward its eventual conclusion, one undeniable truth emerged. Justice was not just about punishment. It was about correcting systemic failures, restoring dignity to those who had been harmed, and ensuring that honor and integrity remained guiding principles for law enforcement officers across the country. The weeks following the trial were a tense but transformative period for Brookfield. The courthouse, still echoing with the arguments and testimonies from Rhodes's case, had become a symbol, not just of justice, but of change. Citizens, once passive observers, now took an active interest in holding local officials accountable. Town hall meetings were packed, and conversations that had previously been whispered behind closed doors now dominated public discourse. Colonel Nathaniel Rhodes had returned home, not just as a decorated veteran, but as an emblem of resilience and courage. The injuries he sustained during his arrest were still healing, yet his determination to advocate for others remained unbroken. Every day he met veterans organizations, community leaders, and advocacy groups, sharing his story and ensuring that the systemic failures he endured would not repeat themselves. Meanwhile, the Brookfield Police Department was undergoing a complete overhaul. Internal investigations continued, revealing layers of misconduct and negligence that went far beyond Hayes. Officers implicated in the abuse were either suspended or dismissed, while training programs emphasizing accountability, ethics, and de-escalation were introduced. The town, once complacent, now demanded transparency from its law enforcement, a culture shift that many thought impossible just months before. Hayes, facing the full weight of the law, attended the final sentencing hearings under heavy scrutiny. His confident demeanor had been replaced by a quiet resignation. Each testimony, each video clip, and each statement from witnesses had eroded the illusion of control he once wielded. Judge Miriam Coldwell, known for her rigorous commitment to justice, presided over the sentencing with a solemn authority. "Officer Hayes," Judge Coldwell began, her voice firm yet measured, "the evidence against you is undeniable. You violated the civil rights of Colonel Rhodes, abused your position of authority, and caused irreversible harm. Your actions do not reflect the values of this department or the trust that the public places in those sworn to protect them." The courtroom remained silent as Caldwell continued. Hayes's legal team offered little defense. The weight of public scrutiny and irrefutable evidence left them with no credible argument. The sentencing was clear, decisive, and historic, a reflection not only of Hayes's wrongdoing, but also of the broader cultural shift in law enforcement accountability. As the gavel came down, Rhodes watched quietly, a sense of closure settling over him. Yet the journey was not merely about retribution. It was about awareness, reform, and the hope that other towns, other departments, and other citizens would recognize the importance of integrity in positions of power. The victory was quiet but profound. Over the following months, Rhodes took an active role in community outreach. He held seminars for law enforcement officers, focusing on empathy, respect, and adherence to ethical standards. Schools invited him to speak about resilience, standing up for one's rights, and the courage it takes to confront systemic injustice. Veterans groups hailed him as a leader, someone who transformed personal trauma into collective empowerment. Brookfield, once known for its complacency, began to rebuild its reputation. Residents, inspired by Rhodes' story, formed oversight committees, implemented citizen review boards, and demanded ongoing transparency. The department, under new leadership, embraced these reforms, not merely as compliance, but as a commitment to honor the trust of the community. For Rhodes, the personal healing process continued alongside the public work.
Therapy sessions, physical rehabilitation, and quiet moments of reflection became essential parts of his daily routine. He knew that while the town was changing, the journey of recovery and reconciliation was ongoing, both for himself and for those affected by the incident.
Community members began to see the tangible results of accountability. Reports of misconduct decreased, citizen engagement rose, and a renewed sense of trust emerged between the public and law enforcement. The story of one man's struggle had sparked a movement, a testament to the power of courage, truth, and persistence. As the dust settled, Rhodes received messages from across the country. Veterans, activists, and ordinary citizens shared their gratitude, expressing that his willingness to stand up against injustice inspired them to take action in their own communities. Each message reminded him that his ordeal, painful as it had been, had a ripple effect far beyond Brookfield. One evening, Rhodes visited the courthouse steps, reflecting on the journey from humiliation to vindication. He spoke quietly to a small gathering of reporters, his voice steady and commanding. This was never just about me. It was about every individual who has ever been denied respect, ignored when they needed help, or mistreated by those in power. The truth matters. Courage matters. And accountability matters. If we fail to uphold these principles, we fail each other. As the story of Brookfield and Colonel Rhodes spread nationwide, it became a benchmark for justice and reform. Schools, departments, and communities began studying the case, learning from the failures and successes, and ensuring that such incidents would be less likely to occur elsewhere. Rhodes's name became synonymous not just with bravery in the military, but with moral courage and the transformative power of speaking out. And as the chapter in Brookfield came to a close, there was a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement. The fight for justice, integrity, and dignity is never truly over. It requires vigilance, empathy, and action from everyone, from the highest-ranking officials to the ordinary citizens willing to hold them accountable. If you watched this story and learned something new, take a moment to make your voice heard. Like this video so others know the story matters. Subscribe to our channel, True Crime Files TV, to hear more stories that expose the truth and inspire change. Share this video with friends because stories like this need to reach every corner of our community. And please, comment below your perspective or the key lessons you've learned. Let's continue the conversation and honor the courage of those who stand up for what is right. This is more than a story. It's a call to recognize injustice, embrace accountability, and stand firm in the pursuit of what is right. Because every voice matters, and every action can ignite change.